Hello and welcome to the Best for Baby podcast. I am your host, Lisa Rogers Sargent, and I am very happy to be back to my beloved podcasting. If you listen to my previous episode, you'll know I have been on summer holidays and it's been some time since I've had an episode. So I am very happy to be back. Today's episode is going to be all about two things, and hopefully it's two things that new and even parents of older children will find very helpful. It's two concepts I've been pondering for some time and treating and teaching parents about for a long time, but not something that's been one of my, shall we say, soapbox topics, because I started the podcast to try and get information out there to parents all about flatheads and tummy time. And there's a few things that I kind of have my soapbox topics that I just wish I could tell people about. And this was never one of them. But actually, over the summer holidays, I realized this is something that I really need to start raising awareness about, because one of the things every parent should know about and implement, and secondly, some parents of children who have this condition, if they treat it early, no big problem at all. But the longer we leave it, the more tricky it gets to treat. So again, it's one of those things I'm really feeling called to talk about. So how it all came about is that in South Africa, where we went on holiday, the funny thing is that obviously it was our summer holidays here. I live in the UK and we had our summer holidays, but my family and I went back to South Africa, where my husband and I are from, which is winter in South Africa when it's summer here. So in case you think, oh, that doesn't really make sense, because what I'm going to talk about is the fact that I saw a lot of children walking around barefoot. And even though it was winter, it's still really warm in the winter. Well, not always, but it can be. And we were lucky enough to catch some really lovely weather. So we were on the beach, we were swimming in the sea. It was that warm, just so that if you think it's not sounding like it's making sense in your head that I was seeing all these barefoot children, but I was in a winter country, that's actually why it is. But what I noticed, or what I was reminded of, is that in South Africa, a lot of children are barefoot a lot of the time. And I'm not just talking about children in poverty, of which there are a lot, and that is the reason why a lot of children are barefoot, but also affluent families and middle-of-the-line families. A lot of the children just are barefoot. It's a thing. I certainly grew up far more barefoot than my daughter is growing up here. And it was quite funny because we had been to a few different things, out in the public arena. And my daughter just looked at me and she said, why are all the children in South Africa barefoot all the time? Why don't they wear shoes here? And she was just super surprised by it. And at that stage, I hadn't really been thinking about it. And then it just made me smile, because I remember I have a nephew and niece, and they are a lot older than my daughter, and they grew up in South Africa. And I remember my sister saying, oh, my nephew has to now start wearing shoes to school, because before that he would just go barefoot. And that was when he was about 6 or 7 years old. And that's the age that they start school in South Africa. Before that, it's nursery and, preschool and that. And he had been barefoot all that time. And it was quite normal and quite natural. And it just got me thinking again, oh, how lovely for the children who grow up like this, how lovely for their feet. And so it just made me want to talk about that a little bit, because I think here, where it's cold in our countries like this, we tend to wrap our children up a lot more. And very often, one of the biggest things I say to parents of new babies is you have to allow them to spend time with their lower half of their bodies naked, with the nappy on, of course, but bare legs, bare feet, because they need to have that sensory stimulation into the skin on their legs and feet, because first of all is going to start desensitizing, particularly the feet, for later on when they start to stand and walk and press their feet against the ground. If they haven't had barefoot time enough as tiny babies and enough stimulation going through the foot sole and the lower legs, they are going to be overly sensitive. And I always go back to, it's almost like a mantra, barefoot is best. And in our society, it's not okay for children to be wandering around barefoot. And so I'm always telling parents they have to compensate for the time a child spends in a shoe, particularly the more supportive a shoe is. And your first walkers are often those really soft little shoes, and that's fine. But sometimes children are referred to podiatrists and they're given insoles, or if they're very late at walking, I might give them insoles myself, or they are just prescribed really strong stability shoes. And I'm always saying to parents, you need to compensate for that by giving them a lot of barefoot time when they're not needing to be in those stability shoes or insoles. So what I want to say to you today is that if you have a tiny baby who's not yet walking, anything up to the walking age, I want you to really spend time with your baby having their legs and their feet bare. And it's a great time every time you change the nappy. So we're not only going to allow them to have bare skin, we're going to give them some sensory stimulation as well. So there's a lot you can do. Obviously, the one that springs to mind is massage. You can massage their legs because that's a lovely calming stimulation. It's going to overwhelm them. They're going to enjoy it. And I've got a video on my website. I'll put the link to it on how to massage your baby's legs. It's a quick video tutorial. Secondly, whenever you change your baby's nappy, just take their little legs and tap the feet on the changing mat. Tap, 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 tap. Rub the feet backwards and forwards on the changing mat. Rub the feet together. Blow raspberries on the feet. Even if you just take your thumbs and you rub the foot soles from heel to toe, kisses to the feet, squeezes to the feet, you're giving lots of sensory information and sensory stimulation to the little feet. Now, by doing these things, it's not only desensitizing the skin and preparing it for later when the baby needs to stand and walk, it's actually building their awareness of their feet and legs, which is so important because in my previous podcast episode, I was talking about some of my favorite things for babies, and one of them is a little toy that you put on a baby's foot. And in that episode, I said, what is really important for baby development is for them to start touching their legs and then reaching for their legs and reaching beyond the knee to the feet and grabbing the feet. When they do this, this is strengthening their core, their lower abdominal muscles, but also that's how babies learn to roll. By accident, they grab onto their little feet and then they flop to the sides and then they repeat that, and it helps them to learn to roll. So it's really important that a baby becomes aware of their feet and therefore wants to grab their feet because they suddenly connect that this belongs to them and they start trying to grab it. So if you want to listen to my previous episode, there's a little baby rattle thing that you put around a baby's foot to encourage them to start grabbing. But my message in this episode is that we want your baby to be spending time stimulated through the foot and the lower leg to build awareness of those parts of their body so that they will start to grab them and therefore develop their normal baby development and be prepared for when the time comes to stand and to walk. Now, interestingly, every time the baby is stimulated by a different kind of stimulation, so again, it's like temperature, hot and cold are two different kind of stimulations. A rough surface, when your older child who's now doing barefoot is walking over different textures, it's a different, carpet to wood to grass to sand. Those are different textures. They send different impulses, different information that is received or recepted through the foot, goes up a nerve to the brain. And the area in the brain that represents the foot and the lower limb receives information and it processes it, and that area becomes mature and developed. And that therefore then builds on body awareness and what we call proprioception, or the awareness of that area of the body. And sometimes I see children who are not yet walking, and there's no reason for it. They are strong enough, but there's no other problem. It's just that their awareness of their legs and feet is not good enough for them to be able to walk with confidence. And so these little children are the classic ones who walk happily holding one finger. And the parent says, I'm not giving them any support. It's like they just need me for confidence. And that's exactly what it is, because it's like they're walking with no awareness of their legs and feet, like they're on jelly almost trying to walk. They just don't know where their feet and ankles are in space. And this is often because we've had this delayed development of awareness and proprioception of those body parts. So please, we're starting off with the little babies. You're going to start giving them lots of time with bare legs, bare feet, and giving them stimulation to their feet and to their legs and encouraging them to touch their own legs and feet. With your older children, we're going to try and keep them barefoot for as much as you can. Obviously, they have to go to nursery with shoes on, but the rest of the time when they're in your home, let them be barefoot. Let them go outdoors. If you have an outdoor garden, amazing. They can walk over grass, they can walk over decking, they can walk over all of those different textures. I know it's not so great if you don't have a garden yourself, you don't really want your child to go to the park and be barefoot, that's fine. If you don't mind, great. But just make sure you're creating enough opportunity for your little toddler or soon to be toddler to be barefoot, because it's going to really help them with that awareness and desensitization. So that's amazing. The second thing about being barefoot is that because the baby and infant foot and ankle is really flexible, they're quite wobbly. So when they start standing and walking, they are super wobbly on those feet. And so the little muscles have to work really hard. And so we see those muscles getting stronger and stronger when they're barefoot. However, if you put them in a shoe that gives them a bit of stability, what happens then is that you rob the foot of opportunity to get nice and strong. So there's little muscles inside the actual foot itself, your intrinsic foot muscles, and then all the muscles in the lower leg, the calf muscles and the shin muscles, they all have to work really hard in little children when they're barefoot. And for the long run, it's so good because they've been really nicely strengthened, and it just helps them to get walking so much sooner if they have had opportunity for those to get strong from as soon as they start putting their feet on the ground. So lots and lots of barefoot time for babies and toddlers, because it builds awareness of the area and it desensitizes and strengthens those areas. Then the second thing that I wanted to talk to you about today is a condition called positional talipes, which I have spoken about in a previous podcast episode, which I think was called How to Spot Molded Baby Syndrome. However, molded baby syndrome is about positional talipes and another condition. So I wanted to go into a little bit more depth on positional talipes today. And this is because I suspect it is far more common than we realize. And secondly, I think it is highly undiagnosed and not treated. And so we have children who should have been treated when they were tiny babies, with it persisting into adulthood, but certainly into much later childhood. And I've been thinking about this a lot over the years, because I often get called to treat children who are the pre-walkers and delayed in walking, or they're just starting to walk and they're tripping and falling a lot, or the feet are asymmetrical and someone's worried about that. I've even had a child that I was referred to see because a healthcare professional had said they thought that perhaps the child has cerebral palsy because one foot turned in so much and the other foot didn't. And we know that you get types of cerebral palsy where you do have this kind of asymmetry between sides. And that was amazing to go and to say to parents, oh no, this is just what we call a positional clubfoot or a positional talipes, which is something that is so easily treated. Even at that stage, it was relatively easy to treat. So I've had a lot of work over the years where it wasn't treated when these little children were tiny babies. And it's made me realize, I think it's going undiagnosed a lot more than we realize. And then now, being on holiday in South Africa and seeing all these little barefoot children, I can spot it, because once I started pondering the whole barefoot thing, I thought about this, and then I started really having a good look. And so what it is that it can either affect one or both feet, where they turn inwards. And if you had to look at the definition, it would indicate that the foot turns inwards and points downwards. However, that's not so much my clinical experience. There's something called a structural clubfoot or a structural talipes, where there's actually a problem with the bones and the joints of the foot, and is almost always diagnosed at birth and treated. And it's quite an intensive treatment. You may have seen babies in plaster casts. It's called Ponseti treatment, and it's really effective, but it has to be done in order to correct the foot. Positional talipes is where the baby has not had enough room inside the womb, and so the foot has been squashed in one position and they haven't been able to move it upwards and outwards. So as a result, we have some short, tight muscles on the inside of the foot, on the inner arch, and on the outside of the foot, it's a bit weaker. And so it makes sense. You treat it by stretching out the tight areas and strengthening the weak areas. And so that's really easy to do with a newborn baby. The statistics will tell you that 1 to 2 children in every 100 live births will be born with a positional talipes. And I think it's possibly higher than that because it's not being diagnosed. So I think my first point I'd like to make is a totally reassuring one, because I'm seeing these children out there, they're much older, they're running around, they're totally happy. The parents have no idea that they have this condition, and it probably is never going to affect them. So that's great news. And I think most children will go on not to have any problems. A physiotherapist, or maybe you, now that you've listened to this, will be able to spot it, but it might not have any impact on their lives. However, there's a small percentage of children who it will have an impact on their lives, like the ones that I've been called to see. So just in the pre-walking stage, their walking is delayed, or they are walking with one foot is very much turned in, or both feet are really turned in and it looks a bit strange, perhaps. Then another thing is the children who are now starting to walk, they might be tripping a lot or stumbling or falling a lot more than they should be. The parents might also be noticing this really uneven or asymmetrical wearing on their shoes. And even sometimes the shoes get worn away very quickly. And then I know a lot of physiotherapists will be called to see children because they've got an immature running gait, or a parent is concerned about the way their child runs, and it's because of this little positional talipes that it's never been treated, and so the foot remains a little bit curved inwards. When a child runs, any kind of tightnesses or asymmetries will be exacerbated. So if the foot pulls in, it'll pull in even more when they start to run. So often the physiotherapists get called in because there's something going on with their running gait that doesn't quite make sense, and this can be the reason why. Very often we get called to see children wearing shoes as a problem for them because they have a very high arch, or it looks like a high arch, but actually again it's that curve inwards of the toes and the front of the foot that lifts that arch, and it makes the arch look almost C-shaped. And so all of this can of course cause discomfort in wearing shoes. Sometimes children refuse to wear the shoes, or over time you see areas on the skin that's been rubbed and they blister, or they have a lot of discomfort as they get older when they're playing sports. And we find particularly in teenagers and adults with untreated positional talipes, they may kind of just feel off when they do like long distance walking or sporting activities, and sometimes they even go as far as to avoid these activities. Finally, and this is completely extreme, but when it's only one foot that's affected, so the one foot that's pulling inwards and the other one hasn't been affected, you get all kinds of asymmetry between the legs developing. Now we know that in order for bone density to build up and for bones to grow well, we need to have good weight bearing through the foot. And so often, like children who walk on their toes, we see that their little heels aren't very developed. They have tiny little heels because they're not weight bearing and walking through the heel. So it's underdeveloped. And so what you can find in extreme conditions is asymmetry between the feet, because the foot with positional talipes has been weight bearing in a different way. So the development of the foot might be different to the development of the non-affected foot. Again, you may have a very small leg length discrepancy as well. And the problem with any kind of asymmetry between limbs is that it can affect balance. And of course, it just feels a little bit uncomfortable, particularly when you're increasing the challenge. So with sport, with long distance walking, running, those more energy intensive activities. So as I said before, this is a very small percentage who will go on to actually have these kind of impacts on them, where most children who have had an untreated positional talipes will be totally fine, and all it will be is that I can spot it if I see it. But it's always helpful, of course, if you can treat it in the early days, and certainly it can always be treated at any stage along the way. So what do you do? Well, first of all, I think if you are pregnant now, the key is to know if you fall into the risk category of having a baby with positional talipes. And that's just because it's a risk category for a baby who's going to have what I referred to in my previous podcast episode about the molded baby syndrome. It's also known as intrauterine compartment syndrome. And it's just where the baby hasn't had a lot of space to grow and move in the womb. And so they're squashed and the little feet are like that. And so the risks for this is obviously if you're having more than one baby, because then you are dramatically reducing the amount of room in the womb per baby. Secondly, if your baby is born very big or very long, and particularly if your baby is born very big or very long and you are quite small. So those are all the risk factors for having a molded baby. And it's essential that if you fall into that category, you do ask your midwife to check for these things, and you yourself check for them as well. Check their feet and also the head turning preference. So please, if you do fall into that category, go and listen to that podcast episode, because it may be that your child doesn't have a positional talipes, but they have a head turning preference. And again, super easy to treat if you pick it up at birth. Now, these are not things people will tell you about when you're pregnant or warn you about when you're pregnant. So it's just good to spread awareness of this, because it's so easy to sort out if you do know about it. When I was pregnant, I'm a medium-sized, say, person, but my husband is 6'8", and I knew there was a chance of my baby being a very tall baby. She certainly was never flagged as being a big baby during pregnancy, but I knew she could be tall. And when she was born, yes, she was 54 centimeters, but she was only a little over 3 kilograms. So she had quite a strong positional talipes with both ankles and a head turning preference. And it was super easy to treat because I dealt with it all the time. So I understand it's possibly not so easy to treat if it's the first time you are dealing with this. But the idea is that you just implement it all the time and you sort it out when they're a baby. So if you identify that you're in a risk, then I would say ask your health visitor to check when your baby is born. Now, if you're in the early days of having a newborn baby, and your health visitor is still coming to check, ask them to check again, because the reality is that this is not something that's going to get picked up at birth. So I keep talking about the fact that it's undiagnosed. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I don't think we should be angry or cross with our health visitors or our midwives or whoever does our newborn checks for missing it. Because the reality is the newborn check is so extensive. They've got so many things to check. There's hips, the heart, the hearing. There's a load of things, the weight, the height. There's so many things that they have to check that are really important. And these are not big issues. As I said, if your child has positional talipes and it never gets treated, the chances are nobody's ever going to know about it. It's never going to be a problem. So you can understand why there's not a massive thing to go and, really focus on the feet. However, if it's a structural talipes, it's probably going to be picked up at birth. I'm almost certain of it. Whereas this is less likely to, because there's just so much to check. So it's with compassion and understanding that we realize that it's not always picked up at birth. And so if you have access to a healthcare visitor, get them to just check it if you are in that risk category. If your baby is now a little bit older or still a tiny baby, but you're not seeing your health visitor anymore, you can actually have a look yourself and see, do your baby's feet turn inwards? Are both turning inwards, or is it just the one? And it's that real inwards turn where the toes are almost pointing to each other or beyond pointing to each other and pointing upwards to the body, and the inner arch is really, really curved tightly. If you're not sure, I will put a link in the show notes to a PDF you can download for free, which is just a parent checklist that I have with some pictures of what talipes looks like and a checklist for you to follow and see if you think your baby may have positional talipes. If you decide that your baby does have a positional talipes, then I would say your starting point would be to either go to your GP and get a referral to physiotherapy, or refer yourself, if you can, to physiotherapy. There are loads of probably free resources out there. If you have a look on YouTube, I'm sure you'll find all kinds of techniques and ideas on how to sort out your baby's feet. I have created a tutorial which explains all about it, and I demonstrate how to do the techniques on like a doll, and then I show you on a baby with talipes so you can see how to do them and how it looks. Now, when I go to parents, the idea is that I just teach them exactly what to do, and then I go away and they do it. And I review them, later, or sometimes I don't need to review them, because it really is something that just has to be done over and over again. If you have a tight muscle, you can't just stretch it once. You have to stretch it over and over and over again until you've released it completely. And if you're trying to get strong, you have to do the same thing. You do repetitions of exercises over and over again. So I can't go for 1 hour once a week. It's not going to make any difference. What makes a difference is the parents learning what to do and then repeating it over and over again. I always say at every nappy change, just do the little routine. So it's not an investment that you need to think, oh, I need to take my baby to physio all the time. What you need to do is just learn how to do it yourself and then do it a lot. The only time we don't see good outcomes is when the parents aren't able to do it as much as they should. Other than that, I find I've had really successful outcomes, and I've put it all into this little video. It's really low cost. I think it's £35. I'll put the link in the show notes. But again, you don't feel obliged. You can go onto YouTube as well and have a look there. For your babies who are a little bit older, so starting to stand or perhaps even starting to walk, you'll see the little foot turned in. You might see the foot is rotated outwards, but the toes are pointing inwards. So the baby's weight bearing more through the outside of the heel. Sometimes it looks like they have a very high arch. And again, they might just be the baby who's not yet walking or stumbling and tripping and that sort of thing. So these babies who are pre-walker age to a little bit older than that, it is a bit more tricky to treat because they're not lying still. And here I would say, ideally, you can get a referral to a physio through your GP or a private referral again. I do a fair amount of online remote consultations where I teach parents what to do, because as long as we can confirm it is definitely positional talipes, it's quite straightforward for me to teach you, but it's all the little tips and tricks of how to get a really active, busy little person to do what you want them to do over and over again. So maybe one day I'll create a tutorial on that, but I haven't done that yet. So try to get some help from a physio. Again, I would never say you're going to be investing in doing repetitive physio, because it's still something that needs to be done over and over. So the physio should be able to teach you exactly what to do, and you just need to make sure you're implementing it. Obviously, when the child gets to about age 5, 6, 7, that's where we're going to see what the adult foot should look like. So you want to have it corrected by then. However, if your child is older, as was the case I saw a lot over the summer, if it's not affecting them, I wouldn't worry too much, but I think a once-off physio session might be helpful just to start putting in a few stretches and things. However, if it is a child who you're noticing they are uncomfortable in their shoes, they're always getting blisters in their shoes, they're avoiding sport, they get discomfort when they're playing sport, then I think you're going to need a bit more regular physiotherapy. That said, as an adult, a physio could teach someone exactly how to stretch out and strengthen their feet, but sometimes they need a bit more hands-on work as well. So you might find the older children, from once the foot is becoming like an adult foot, at that sort of 5, 6, 7 years, they might need a little bit more regular hands-on physiotherapy, in which case I would say try to get a referral through your GP or go see someone in a clinic near you for that age group. So that's my take, and I hope the biggest point I've made is a reassuring one, that there's only a very small category of children that it becomes a problem for in later life, and it's always treatable, no matter how bad it is. It's just varying degrees of how easy it is to treat the longer you leave it. And on top of that, if your child has a positional talipes, or if they don't have a positional talipes, please always, so for all children and all babies, give them loads of barefoot time, because the barefoot time for a child with positional talipes is massively helpful, and in a different way, the barefoot time for a child without a positional talipes is massively helpful too. So if you take nothing else from this, please just take the barefoot is best in most cases. in a neurotypical foot, shall we say, in children who've got complex neurological needs, and they are the children who usually need splinting and supportive shoes and things like that. So there is a place, sometimes even with a neurotypical foot, but that's usually much later on, and certainly not in the pre-walker. We try to keep them barefoot. Sometimes a physio may guide you through having some stability shoes because we need the child to get going and walking if they're kind of over 18 months and not walking yet. But the rest of the time, we want them barefoot as much as possible to just build up the strength in the feet, have some good sensory input there. And with that, it's time for me to wish you all the very best, and as usual, all the best for your baby.